Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Sharpening Report. I am your host, Josh Peck. Tonight, we are going to be talking about the fourth dimension. And when I say fourth dimension, I'm not talking about time. I'm talking about a hypothetical, theoretical fourth dimension of space that I believe actually exists, and I believe that it might relate to what we think of as the spirit world, or what the Bible describes as spiritual reality. One verse that I like is 1 Corinthians 13:12, which says, "For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know, even as also I am known." Now, I think in the original context of this, it's talking about prophecy, that we have these prophecies throughout the Bible. We don't know exactly how they're all going to piece together, but we will someday. And then even more importantly, Jesus, there's going to come a day where we're going to know him the way he knows us. But also, I think that this could tie into just reality itself, creation itself. Because right now we see in part, we see three dimensions of space and one of time. But we all pretty much figure there's more than that. Whatever the spirit world is, could we count that as a higher dimension? We're going to be talking about that today. And, it's interesting, too, because it's easy for us to visualize objects within our three dimensions of space. We can even visualize one and two-dimensional space. But when it comes to a fourth dimension of space, visualization or imagination about that is pretty much impossible. So the question then could come up, well, why even bother with it, with something that we can't imagine? Well, I think that there's good answers to this question. So first of all, it's important because it's a part of God's creation. In modern physics, the idea of a fourth spatial dimension is technically theoretical, but like I mentioned, I equate the fourth spatial dimension with the spirit world, so I'm treating it as a biblical fact. And learning things and entertaining possibilities can help us understand the complexities of God's design. This understanding can lead to a more full grasp of some of the more supernatural things written about in the Bible. Second, it can be used as an apologetic and witnessing tool. If you're attempting to defend your faith or share the gospel with somebody who already has an understanding of some of the theories surrounding modern physics, then it's a great advantage to be able to speak to them in terms that they'll understand. And that's especially true in providing answers from a biblical worldview to questions that come from a scientific worldview. So common examples of those who employ this tactic are Christians who say they study earth sciences to defend the position of a possible young earth creation, or Christians who study biology to refute the theory of evolution. So in the same way as these, the study of modern physics can aid in defending a belief in spiritual existence. And then third, because it's just fascinating, the idea of a reality beyond what we can physically experience is a belief that falls right in line with biblical Christianity. So why wouldn't we want to learn more about it if we had the opportunity? And of course, there's many other reasons for this type of study, but that's just three in my personal list. And even though we may not be able to visualize what a fourth spatial dimension would look like, there are tricks that we can use to help understand it. So we're going to be looking at a few of these tricks throughout this part of the video. And this by no means is a completely exhaustive study of all the methods used to explain the fourth spatial dimension. The examples included here are just a few that are easier to grasp than the many that are available. Before we continue, if you could, please hit the subscribe button, click the bell to turn on all notifications. Even if you believe you are subscribed, check again, because I've been getting a lot of reports from people saying that they are unsubscribed even though they thought they were subscribed. So make sure you subscribe to this channel on YouTube, click the bell to turn on all notifications. We have finally surpassed 40,000 subscribers, and we want that number to keep growing. So we'd love it if you would love it if you would subscribe. Also, make sure that you check out all of the links in the description below. We've got a lot of great stuff for you there. And lastly, and I'll get in this a little bit later, but if you want this full video, there is a full video available at dailyrenegade.com. So here on YouTube, we don't usually put the full video up unless it's an update or something, but for actual Sharpening Report episodes, everything's available at dailyrenegade.com. Okay, so probably the best method I've come across in understanding higher spatial dimensions is used in fictional literatures. And one popular example of this among physicists, and one that I'll be referring to from time to time, and have been for years, is a novella entitled Flatland. It's called Flatland, A Romance of Many Dimensions by E.A. Abbott from 1884. It's totally free to read. You can go online and find it. But the basic idea is to use the written word to help the reader imagine what our three-dimensional world would look like from the perspective of a two-dimensional being. And when considering the two-dimensional perspective, that can help us understand what the fourth spatial dimension would look like compared to our three-dimensional perspective. So in Flatland, the main character is named A Square, and he tells us of his experience as a two-dimensional being who later encounters the third spatial dimension. So he begins his story by first explaining what his reality would look like from our three-dimensional perspective. So here's a quote. Nothing was visible nor could be visible to us except straight lines, and the necessity of this I will speedily demonstrate. Place a penny on the middle of one of your tables in space, and leaning over it, look down upon it. It will appear as a circle. But now, drawing back to the edge of the table, gradually lower your eye, thus bringing yourself more and more into the condition of the inhabitants of Flatland, and you will find the penny becoming more and more oval to your view. And at last, when you place your eye exactly on the edge of the table so that you are, as it were, actually a Flatland citizen, the penny will then have ceased to appear oval at all and will have become, so far as you can see, a straight line. End quote. So since Flatland would only consist of the X and Y axes, there would be no up or down. There would only be side to side and front to back. And because of this, the perspective of Flatlanders would be considerably different from our own. Any shape they would be looking at would appear to them as a line. So imagine if you were able to breach Flatland as a three-dimensional being. Let's say you were able to just stick your finger through their two-dimensional space. Let's say their two-dimensional space is here. You were able to stick your finger through it. Well, what would that look like to Flatlanders? You know, they would see a very small point in space and followed by a very small line segment appear out of nowhere as your finger passes through. Now, in two-dimensional reality, you know, this would be a circle, but since Flatlanders lack the ability to see the entire shape, they can't see it from above, it would look to them as a line right in front of them. So similarly, in our three spatial dimensions of reality, we cannot see around to the backside of solid and opaque objects that are right in front of us. So technically, everything we see is in two-dimensional perspective. Or we have three-dimensional perspective, but it's like a two-dimensional flat image. Like I can't look outside my back window and see the neighbor's fence, and I can't see around that fence. I would have to physically move around the fence to see that. Well, it's the same with you putting your finger in Flatland. If a Flatlander was looking at it this way, they wouldn't be able to see the backside, so they can't see the full circle of your finger. They would just see what's right in front of them, this line here. So as your finger passes through this two-dimensional plane, they would see that line segment grow in size because your finger is wider here than it is here. And when you take your finger out again, they would see the line segment shrink in size and then disappear, seeming to vanish in thin air. You could also stick your whole hand through two-dimensional space. Now, if you did that, at first they would see like a small line segment appear as the tip of your middle finger breaches through two-dimensional space. Next, your index and ring finger would break through. Right? And the Flatlanders would see two more segments appear on either side as the first one grows in size. Then as your pinky and your thumb break through, they would see two more segments appear. And what they would see next would be truly surprising. As the rest of your hand goes through, so about here they would see all five of these segments, which is your fingers. But if you push your hand even further through, all those segments would converge into one large segment. Then as your wrist went through, they would see that larger segment shrink in size. And then when you pull your hand out, they would see the entire spectacle again, only this time in reverse, until all the segments disappear completely. Now imagine if you were able to take and think about it this way. If you put your fingers in like this and moved them around, they would see five different segments moving around independently. They wouldn't know that all five of these segments are attached to one thing. They would see them as separate. Now imagine if you were able to take a Flatlander out of his two-dimensional environment and thrust him into our three spatial dimensions. What would he see? Well, the Flatlander would still have eyes that could only perceive two dimensions. Even if you tried to position him in a way that was facing directly at you, all the Flatlander could see would be a line made of basically differently colored segments, depending which line on your face he's looking at, how high you're putting him. So his view of your hair, face, shirt, pants, shoes, that would be nothing more than a multicolored line. If you were moving, the Flatlander would only see a single line of changing color. So we can use the example of Flatland to help understand what a four-dimensional interaction would be like in our three-dimensional world. So if a four-dimensional sphere, which is called a hypersphere, were to move through our three spatial dimensions, we would only be able to perceive it through our three-dimensional eyes. We wouldn't see the whole four-dimensional object. We would see a very tiny sphere, so not a line segment or a circle. This would be a tiny sphere, suddenly appear as it breaches our dimension. We would see the sphere grow in size as it moves through our dimension, shrink in size as it moves out, then disappear completely. So using the same example, if we were able to travel to the fourth spatial dimension from our perspective, it would look like three-dimensional objects were changing color, growing, shrinking, appearing, and disappearing as they moved through four-dimensional space. These, of course, would not actually be three-dimensional objects. They would possess a fourth dimension, but since our eyes can only perceive three dimensions, to us, they would look like ever-changing three-dimensional objects. It'd probably look like you're on some kind of drug trip or something. But this also helps explain why we can't actually see the fourth spatial dimension. So just as Flatlanders would have no concept or method of truly perceiving the z-axis that defines our third dimension of space, up and down, we have no way of perceiving the fourth spatial dimension in that same way. So in fact, German physicist Hermann von Helmholtz compared our inability to see the fourth spatial dimension to the inability of a blind person to understand color. There's no way to describe a color to somebody who has never seen it. Another interesting thing to consider is the fact that though Flatlanders wouldn't be able to perceive the third dimension, it's still all around them. In fact, it's even touching them. That is how the fourth spatial dimension is in relation to us. Though we can't even begin to picture what the fourth spatial dimension would look like, it is all around us. It's touching us. It's even inside us. The way that, like a Flatlander, the third spatial dimension would be, if you have a Flatlander and you're looking down at the Flatlander, you can see inside of the Flatlander. Well, that's because we have three-dimensional perspective. So the third spatial dimension is even inside of the Flatlander. Well, it's the same with the fourth dimension with us. It's actually touching us. And so the reality of spiritual existence is here. It's literally right in front of our faces. We just can't see it. Now, another interesting idea from Flatland is that of imprisonment. And this connects with the Bible as well. So in Flatland, a circle can simply be drawn around a Flatlander to imprison him in jail. So for the Flatlander, escape would not be possible. But if a three-dimensional person were to come along and just pick the Flatlander out of that circle and put him back in Flatland outside of the circle, well, then the Flatlander would be free. It'd be that easy. So to other Flatlanders, it would look like the Flatlander disappeared while in jail, then reappeared outside of it. Now, this actually might help us wrap our heads around Peter's miraculous jailbreak in the book of Acts. As it is written, and this is starting in Acts 12, verse 1. Now about that time, Herod the king stretched forth his hands to vex certain of the church, and he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. And because he saw it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter also. Then were the days of unleavened bread. And when he apprehended him, he put him in prison and delivered him to 4 quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intending after Easter to bring him forth to the people. Peter therefore was kept in prison, but prayer was made without ceasing of the church unto God for him. And when Herod would have brought him forth the same night. Peter was sleeping between two soldiers bound with two chains, and the keepers before the door kept the prison. And behold, the angel of the Lord came upon him, and a light shined in the prison. And he smote Peter on the side and raised him up, saying, Arise up quickly. And his chains fell off from his hands. And the angel said unto him, Gird thyself and bind on thy sandals. And so he did. And he saith unto him, Cast thy garment about thee and follow me. And he went out and followed him, and wist not that it was true which was done by the angel, but thought he saw a vision. When they were past the first and the second ward, they came unto the iron gate that leadeth unto the city, which opened to them of his own accord, and they went out and passed on through one street, and forthwith the angel departed from him. So that's Acts 12, 1 through 10. So Peter's escape can be likened to the idea of a three-dimensional being helping a flatlander escape circle jail. In the account of Acts, we have the angel of the Lord, which is clearly a higher dimensional being, and the angel helps Peter escape imprisonment by causing the chains to fall from his hands. The angel then leads Peter out of the prison. This was such a fantastic event for Peter that as he was following the angel, he didn't even know if he was experiencing this for real or if it was a vision. The angel and Peter then reach the iron gate that led to the city. The iron gate opens, seemingly by itself, which allows Peter to leave. So using examples of how these things would work in Flatland helps us understand how they could be possible in our own reality. We just have to think of a similar experience that could happen in a two-dimensional plane and consider how it would look if the third spatial dimension became involved. Then we just compare that experience to the idea of a fourth spatial dimension becoming involved in our three-dimensional reality. So an event such as a jailbreak would be just as miraculous to a Flatlander as it is to us when a being of higher dimensions gets involved. Now, that being said, this in no way can be used to discredit or naturalize miraculous phenomena. When a miracle happens, whether from the fourth spatial dimension, higher dimensions, or completely outside of dimensional reality, it ultimately originates from God, and it's still an incredibly holy and blessed experience. So, if anything, gaining understanding of the fourth spatial dimension should help us appreciate God, creation, and the miraculous even more. Now, Flatland is not the only work of fiction that tackles this mind-bending subject of the fourth spatial dimension. I do believe that Flatland contains the most reliable or relatable examples that we can use in our own understanding. So I'll probably be referring to that one specifically throughout this video, and I usually do when I try to explain these things. However, there are other great works of fiction that can be mentioned. So H.G. Wells, the author of The Time Machine and a slew of others, wrote of the fourth spatial dimension. So in his short story, and I should mention too, in The Time Machine, H.G. Wells did write about time as the fourth dimension in a temporal sense, as time. But in the story we're going to look at right now, the fourth dimension that he tackled was spatial. So in his short story, entitled The Plattner Story, H.G. Wells wrote of a science teacher by the name of Gottfried Plattner. And in the story, Plattner conducts a chemical experiment that ends up going wrong. The result is Plattner being sent into a higher reality and into the fourth dimension, basically. And when he returns to the real world, Plattner realizes his body is not quite the same as it was before he left. His heart is now on the right side, and he is now left-handed. When he's examined, the doctors discover that Plattner's entire body has been reversed. And this is deduced as proof that he moved into the fourth spatial dimension, was flipped around basically and returned. Now, of course, this type of reversal of body organs is not possible in our normal three dimensions of space. So, to understand how this could be possible with the aid of a fourth spatial dimension, all we got to do is think back to Flatland. If we wanted to reverse a Flatlander, all we would need to do is pull him up out of two dimensions, flip him around in our three dimensions of space, and just put him back. Now, we might be inclined to think that all this would do to a Flatlander is cause him to be facing the opposite way, but remember, for a Flatlander, there is no up or down. So because of this, they don't have a top or a bottom. So therefore, if one is actually flipped like that in our third spatial dimension, when he returns to his original plane of existence, his entire body would be literally reversed. Seems like a simple thing to us, but it would be a very complicated thing to them. So we can use this story to understand what H.G. Wells was getting at, or we can use this example to understand what H.G. Wells was getting at in the Plattner story. For a person's internal organs to all be reversed, he would have to be flipped around in the fourth spatial dimension before returning. Now, there's no way to know exactly what that would look like in 4 dimensions of space. We don't have the ability to visualize that, but we can recognize the result of such an action. So that is why it was recognized as proof that Plattner traveled to the fourth spatial dimension and returned. It would be the only way that that type of body reversal could be possible. Attempting to explain what happened to Plattner in regards to the reversal he endured, the narrator of the story says, quote, "There is no way of taking a man and moving him about in space, as ordinary people understand space, that will result in our changing his sides. Whatever you do, his right is still his right, his left, his left. You can do that with a perfectly thin and flat thing, of course. If you were to cut a figure out of paper, any figure with a right and left side, you could change its side simply by lifting it up and turning it over. But with a solid, it is different. Mathematical theorists tell us the only way in which the right and left sides of a solid body can be changed is by taking that body clean out of space as we know it, taking it out of ordinary existence, that is, and turning it somewhere outside of space. This is a little abstruse, no doubt, but anyone with any knowledge of mathematical theory will assure the reader of its truth. To put the thing in technical language, the curious inversion of Plattner's right and left sides is proof that he has moved out of our space into what is called the fourth dimension and that he has returned again to our world," end quote. Now, as an interesting side note in the story, Plattner encounters beings in the fourth spatial dimension, and these beings are known as Watchers of the Living, or just Watchers for short. They are also reminiscent of human beings in three-dimensional space, even to the point of seeming to project certain personality traits and qualities of the specific human they are connected with by way of watching. Now, for those who are familiar with Genesis 6, the book of Enoch, and biblical descriptions of familiar spirits, things like that, these details of the Watchers in the Plattner story will prove to be pretty interesting. Now, H.G. Wells wrote another story called The Wonderful Visit, in which a man accidentally shoots an angel out of the sky thinking that it's a bird. When the man confronts the angel, he discovers that the angel is just as surprised by the man's existence as the man is about the angels. So part of their conversation goes like this. Quote, "And in some incomprehensible manner I have fallen into this world of yours out of my own," said the angel, "into the world of my dreams grown real." "It is confusing," said the vicar. "It almost makes one think there may be a 4 dimensions after all, in which case, of course," he went on hurriedly, for he loved geometrical speculations and took a certain pride in his knowledge of them, "there may be any number of three-dimensional universes packed side by side and all dimly dreaming of one another. There may be world upon world, universe upon universe. It's perfectly possible. There's nothing so incredible as the absolutely possible. But I wonder how you came to fall out of your world into mine." End quote. So in this story, the angel inhabits the world of the fourth spatial dimension. Beings in the angel's world are no more aware of three-dimensional humans as humans are of angels. The angel and the man deduce that they live in separate worlds that overlap. Of course, we can compare some things in this story to what the Bible says about angels, but not everything. Angels do seem to exist in a plane of existence that overlaps our own, at least to a point, but the idea that angels aren't aware of our existence can't really be backed up by the Bible. So we got to keep in mind with these types of stories that it's only fiction. We might be able to glean some examples to support biblical ideas from things such as this, but we should not try to build entire doctrines out of them. So that being said, it makes for an entertaining story. Now, the work of H.G. Wells opened up literature to a new type of fiction. So in 1895, George MacDonald mixed ideas about parallel dimensions and mysticism with Christian symbolism in his book Lilith. In Lilith, George MacDonald tells the story of Mr. Vane, a man who comes into contact with an extra-dimensional being named Mr. Raven. Mr. Vane travels to the other dimension by way of a mirror with Mr. Raven. It's later discovered that Mr. Raven is, in fact, the biblical Adam. Mr. Vane also encounters giants in this realm, as well as Lilith, the supposed first wife of Adam. So again, we've got to keep in mind that while some of these stories are entertaining, it doesn't mean we gain doctrine from them. Now, it's weird that, Watchers, the Nephilim, the giants, these keep coming up in these stories. And this was well before anybody would have connected them with anything multidimensional. Because there was, there's spiritual and there's natural. And back then they didn't really think of them like that. So again, but we don't gain doctrine from these. So the idea of Lilith as the first wife of Adam before Eve is not a biblical teaching. And in fact, George MacDonald himself was a Christian universalist, meaning he believed everyone would eventually be saved and there's no eternal damnation. Though MacDonald believed this, he did write of a divine judgment and earned salvation in Lilith. Though he wrote of some principles that are biblical, he also wrote of many that are not. Therefore, we can't really use this work as an accurate portrayal of the author's beliefs. And again, nor should we gain doctrine from it. But again, it is interesting that these people were inspired to write these stories about the fourth dimension. And somehow they keep including angels, Nephilim, Watchers. And that makes me wonder, were they inspired for a reason? Do the Watchers or the Nephilim, the giants in Genesis 6 and the book of Enoch, do these have something to do with the fourth spatial dimension? Now, I personally do believe that the fourth spatial dimension is real. And a big part of that, I think it can be shown simply in science. They say that an object of a lot of mass, or really any mass, it bends space. And a lot of times you see that example of like a bowling ball on a bed sheet. And the bed sheet, you can see that it's bending, The weight of the bowling ball brings down the bed sheet. Well, in that, the bed sheet's a two-dimensional surface. If that's happening in space, it wouldn't just be down, it would actually be bending space in all directions. And that's hard to visualize, but it would be bending space in all directions. And that's what they do. The Earth does that, the sun does that. Even you and me do that. Well, just like the bed sheet needs an extra dimension. It needs a third dimension to bend into. So while the top of the bed sheet's a two-dimensional surface, if there were no third dimension, that bed sheet would never bend because there would be nothing for it to bend into. For it to bend down, it needs up and down. So I would assume that this is how you can use the idea of a two-dimensional reality, hypothetically, but you can use that to help explain some of these things. If space in the same way is bending around Earth and the sun and black holes and all this stuff, well, it needs space to bend into. Otherwise, it wouldn't bend at all. So just even scientifically, to me, there has to be a fourth dimension of space. But again, it's really interesting that this keeps being tied into the Watchers and Nephilim and stuff. And if you think about it, what Enoch says about the Watchers and the Nephilim, or even if you don't like the book of Enoch, you can just stick with Genesis. It's the same thing. But this is a time where, for at least fourth dimensional beings, if not more, they in a sense fell down to Earth and somehow inhabited three-dimensional bodies in some way that was able to procreate, and they procreated with human women to make these enormous Nephilim giant hybrid offspring things. So it was a time where beings of a higher dimension interacted with our three-dimensional world. And a lot of people think that that's going to happen again, prophetically, that there's a time, and actually it might be happening now. When you think about the descriptions of Flatland and what it would look like if you were to put an object in Flatland and move it around and take it out, there's a lot of people with a lot of UFO reports that describe the same thing just in three dimensions. Starts out as a tiny little pinpoint of light or a sphere, and then it grows, splits into two, goes back together, disappears. That's exactly what we would expect if something from a fourth spatial dimension or higher is interacting with our world. And then you throw on top of that, this whole idea of an alien hybridization program. Well, that's basically the same thing as Genesis 6. That's beings of somewhere else, of a higher dimension. I don't believe that these aliens are aliens from other planets. So beings of a higher dimension are interacting and procreating with human beings of 3 dimensions. It's the same exact thing that we read about in Genesis 6 and the Book of Enoch. So it's interesting that even though many of these authors weren't Christians that we're talking about, that still many of them kind of picked up on these themes, like they were inspired somehow by it. Who was inspiring it? Who knows? For what purpose? Maybe to just get into the public consciousness these ideas, and that might lead to what we see a lot in sci-fi today. So a lot of this stuff is inspired by most likely the very same beings that are perpetrating these invasions, I guess. So, what else do you call them? So it's just interesting to me that keeps coming up. There seems to be a connection with the Nephilim, the Watchers, and the 4th dimension. And it'll be really interesting, too, that, strangely enough, the idea of the 4th dimension was used a lot in the 18 and 1900s in witchcraft. That's another thing that we might have time to get to today. We'll see. Let's just continue, and then we'll see if we have time to get to that. So another work of fiction that we can look at is The Inheritors, an extravagant story, and that was written in 1901 by Joseph Conrad and Ford M. Hufer, or AKA Ford Maddox Ford. The Inheritors, excuse me, The Inheritors is a story about 4th dimensional beings that carry out a plan to take over the Earth. See, here we go again. And by the way, when I researched for this, I did not go out of my way to try to find old stories that have to do with the 4th dimension and have to do with angels or Nephilim. I just tried to find fictional stories of the 4th dimension from this time period, and this showed up all over them just by chance. I don't think I found one that didn't have some element of that in it. So, again, very, very strange. Lots of Watcher and Nephilim stuff in here, but. So this is a story about 4th dimensional beings that carry out a plan to take over the Earth. The main character of the story, Arthur, is a journalist with high ideals in the beginning, and after meeting a mysterious woman who is a dimensionist, that's a term used in the story to describe 4th dimensional beings, Arthur compromises his ideals in order to attract the woman and become something more in life. Now, what makes The Inheritors really interesting is that, again, there's a lot of themes throughout that go hand in hand with the fringe Christian eschatology defined by, again, certain understandings of Genesis 6, the return of the Nephilim, the alien gospel, and others. It's all over throughout these works of fiction. Now, you probably realize that the stories referenced here are from the late 1800s to the early 1900s. There are many examples from that time period as well as our own that I could source that display the same themes. But there's a couple of reasons I picked specific stories from that time period. First, I wanted to show that even more than 100 years ago, the 4th spatial dimension was being discussed in literature. It wasn't only a scientific theory. There were lay people reading about the possibilities of the 4th spatial dimension. And second, I believe that these stories adequately portray the diversity of topics that were written about during that time period concerning the 4th spatial dimension. There's a lot of other stories containing the same themes, and of course they continue on into today. But what I wanted to show though is this idea. A lot of us Christians will complain about like ancient aliens and stuff, and how they're twisting the Bible and so. Well, this isn't anything new. This has been going on, in various forms of entertainment, from books to movies, television shows. The idea of extra-dimensional beings, sometimes that's mistakenly labeled as extraterrestrial beings. There's a difference. But coming in contact with humanity, it's everywhere and it's increasing. And this has been going on for more than 100 years, especially in regards to higher dimensions. And because, of course, I personally share many beliefs that surround that fringe Christian eschatology, I believe that it's possible that humanity is and has been, is being prepared for something big and something that will involve higher dimensions. My personal theory about this is, we've heard a lot about these alien abduction phenomena scenarios. Where people get abducted, the alien says that they're from another planet. And it's funny because they used to say that they were from Venus or Mars, but now that we know that that's not possible, now they're from Zeta Reticuli or even further. Um, but even more lately, it seems like these beings are backing off the extraterrestrial thing a little bit. I mean, they're still leaning into it, but even more, we're seeing more of these things that are claiming that they're either extra dimensional, so from a higher dimension, or that they're us in the future. Um, which, of course, I don't believe either of those are. Well, okay, I don't believe the future thing at all, but the idea that they might be from a higher dimension, that makes sense to me. And the idea that they have access somehow to three-dimensional bodies in some way that we can interact with, that makes sense to me because that's exactly what we read about in Genesis and the Book of Enoch and things like that. So that makes us wonder: are we being set up? Are we being prepared for a return of these beings? Because I would bet, especially lately, since about 2017 when we started getting soft disclosure, I would be willing to bet that if these beings showed themselves now, and I actually don't think that they fully can. I might be wrong on that, but I believe that there's a restrainer that the Bible talks about, and once the restrainer is removed, then these things can happen more. But let's say I'm wrong on that. Let's say a bunch of craft appear in the sky, but they have extra dimensional capabilities. So we're seeing them disappear and reappear. Well, if we establish communication with those things, and if they say that they're from a higher dimension and they have things to teach us, the entire world would worship him. I mean, who would be skeptical of that? I mean, you and I would be, of course, but the world, by and large, they're searching for something like that. We're built as human beings to crave a savior. Now, that savior is supposed to be Jesus. That's who's calling out to us. That's our shepherd. But just like sheep crave a shepherd, we crave a savior. They're more than happy to step in for that. They're already doing it, in fact, just through channeling and seances, and they're already getting people to fall away without even having to physically show up. So, of course, we would see that, and so I think that it's a good. I think it's a good guess to say that the great delusion, the strong delusion, the end times delusion might have something to do with these beings and what their role really is. So we'll have to see, but I think that's why teachings like this and videos like this are important to show, like, hey, just because something is of a different nature than ours doesn't mean that you just trust it. It doesn't mean that you should be as skeptical of them making any claims as you would be a human being making any claims, even if they can do seemingly miraculous things. That doesn't mean anything. I can do miraculous things that would, things that would seem miraculous to my cat. that doesn't mean that every human being can be trusted because of that. Anyway, so I mentioned before that yeah, okay, I think we're going to get to that next. There is a connection with the fourth dimension and occultic beliefs, and which, of course, you would expect that if these beings are using the idea of the fourth dimension to inspire people to, down the wrong ways of thinking, towards deceptive pathways, that would lead them astray and lead them away from Christ. Because one of the biggest lies is that, yeah, the fourth dimension is real, but you can manipulate it. You can enter it and exit it at will. You can have access to it. No, you can't. Just like a flatlander doesn't have access to the third dimension by nature, we, by nature, do not have access to the fourth dimension. Our time for that will come when we pass from this life, but in the meantime, no, we're not supposed to be messing with that, and there's good reason. There's very dangerous things there. So I want to talk a little bit about that. I want to make a quick mention of something, though. So last week, I gave a short update that we were selling our house. Everything seemed to go well. And Okay, so but we might have to pay some taxes. Well, we did. We found out how much that was, and it was just in taxes alone. We first had to spend $92,000, $9,200. Excuse me, 92,000. It's getting there. $9,200, $9,200, just to sell our house in Illinois because we were only there for 5 months. You know, we only owned the house for 5 months. And I guess in Illinois, they penalize you for that in taxes if you don't have your house for 2 years or more. So, so we had to do that. Then also we sent in all the paperwork and everything, but the people at the post office, they put on the wrong label and they sent it to New Jersey, and so it didn't get there in time. So we ended up having to pay even more money for that. So this whole thing has kind of been a nightmare. I'm hoping and praying that it's over now. Um, and for those of you who are brand new, basically we have a house in Illinois we're trying to sell, where I worked before I accepted a job here in Oklahoma at Prophecy Watchers. So while we still own that house, while that house is in our possession, we're paying a mortgage on that house and we're paying rent here on another house, and we're a single income family. Just anything I bring in, that's what supports the family, and we have 5 kids. So, um, so it's been a little worrisome, but God has been really good and has been providing, and you guys have been incredibly generous. Something else that's been helping out a lot is I talk about Cornerstone Asset Metals, which link and phone number in the description below. So that's been a big help for people who are interested in doing that, investing in some silver from a place that's not going to rip you off, from an actual Christian place. Um, but so we're still kind of, all of this was supposed to be all said and done July 12th, but it's the government. They're going to find any way they possibly can to charge you even more taxes and more taxes. And um, so we're not completely out of it yet. I'm hoping by next week, I'm hoping I'll be able to announce that we're completely out of it, but I don't know that for sure yet. Um, there was this other charge that we had to pay. So it's been kind of it's been kind of a nightmare, but you know, I've been telling people if you want to donate to help us out through that, paypal.me/JoshPeck disclosure. That's the best place to do it. I also have a Cash App. It's $JoshScottPeck. Or if you wanted to do a check, you could send a check to the Prophecy Watchers P.O. Box and just put my name on it. Like, don't make it out to them because then it's a whole tax nightmare. But if you want to donate to them, obviously donate to them. But if you're trying to get something to me, you can just address it to them. But then, like, put my name on it so they know. Um, yeah. Also, and we're always going to be. We're still collecting donations for Nathan's health. He's a cancer survivor. Still has lots of issues. He's in remission, so he doesn't have cancer, but we have to do a lot of things to make sure the cancer doesn't come back. And we're taking a holistic approach, which is expensive, and insurance doesn't cover it. So I've talked about all of that a lot before. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to repeat the same stuff every week. So all that. We're collecting donations for that stuff. If you can help, it would be great. And as soon as the house is officially sold and everything is said and done, and as soon as like all of it is in the past, I will announce it and let you know. But as far as recording, as far as like right now when I'm recording this, not available. It's not. We're not there yet. So we'll see. Keep us in prayer. That's the biggest thing that you can do is keep us in prayer, and we'd really appreciate that. Okay, so we do have more to get to. Like I mentioned, I want to talk about a history of fourth dimensional beliefs and how they tie into the occult and witchcraft and stuff. But we're gonna do that in the members only section. So if you haven't had a chance, head on over to dailyrenegade.com and get a membership today. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year, and I suggest getting the $100 a year if you can, because it's cheaper in the long run. Essentially, you get 2 months for free. And Daily Renegade is where we put all of our full videos. We have had so many censorship issues with YouTube that we can't put full videos on there anymore. We need to back it up somewhere safe. So that is dailyrenegade.com. The website works beautifully. There's a community tab there. If you're even slightly familiar with YouTube and Facebook, you're going to understand. Daily Renegade is really easy to navigate, and it works beautifully. And you can interact with one another in the community tab. So it works out really great. And I post all of my videos there first, so every member of Daily Renegade gets early access to everything. Every video I put, I make sure it's on Daily Renegade first. Yeah, please go and get a membership if you haven't. It helps support this ministry. Also helps support the we want to make apps, basically, and I'm in the process of it now. So I found somebody. It's not through Uscreen, because Uscreen was wanting to charge me a lot of money. It was actually a little more than my mortgage, just to get the phone app and the TV app going. But I found somebody else that says that they can do it for a lot cheaper, and it'd be basically the same thing. So I'm in the process. I went ahead and went for it. So it kind of took a step of faith there. But it still costs money, and there's still going to be upkeep with it. So your membership fee helps support that. And I'm hoping very soon I'll be able to announce that we have a TV and phone app available for you. So they are in development now. I can at least announce that. They're in development now. Okay, so I guess that's it for people who are viewing for free. If you're viewing this at dailyrenegade.com, just keep watching. You don't have to do anything. Just hold on the line. Everybody else watching for free on YouTube or Rumble or anywhere else, thank you so much. And until next time, take care and God bless.